Have you ever wanted to launch your podcast but had no idea what you should do first? Have you ever wanted to launch your podcast, make an impact? Have you ever wanted to launch your podcast to actually grow your business? In this episode, we're gonna talk about 3 steps to launch your podcast today. So if this is your first time here, welcome to the Failures Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Terryl Humphrey, and over the last half a decade, I've produced over 893 podcast episodes while helping 19 people launch their podcast with confidence. And one thing that I've learned while launching your podcast with confidence is that it takes work, but it not only takes work, it takes commitment. It takes a desire. It takes a will to do the work. So if this is your first time here, get ready, because today we're talking about how to launch your podcast with confidence. So point number 1 that I want to talk about is that you have to use what you have. Use what you have. In other words, it don't matter if you have an Android, it doesn't matter if you have an iPhone, doesn't matter if you have an iPad, doesn't matter if you have a laptop. If you have a device that has a camera, it could be 1 camera or it could be 3 cameras on one device, or it could be 2 cameras on another device. Or you could just have a device that has a camera where you can literally record yourself. Where you can literally record yourself. When you record yourself, you have to understand that first you got to get comfortable on camera. If you're not comfortable on camera, you're not going to be able to launch your podcast with confidence. If you're not comfortable with your voice, you're not going to be able to produce a podcast. I'll give you a prime example. When I started half a decade ago, 893 episodes before, I started with what I had. This was me. I had a short tripod, and at the time I had 2 cameras, the short tripod, then I had 3 books underneath it. But the camera was so short, it didn't even have my eye level. Like, these are my eye levels. I had to have a tripod, put things underneath it, and it still was short. So when I started my podcast, hold on, let me say books, tripod. I started what I had. I wasn't trying to go out and get all the fancy equipment, fancy studios, fancy places. In fact, I didn't even know anything about that. But what I did know is that I had everything that I needed. I had a camera, a phone with the camera, and I pressed record. When I press record, I learned how to edit. I learned how to publish. I learned how to be consistent. I learned how to show value. And over time, that one particular video helped me produce Failures Knowledge Podcast 893 times. So if you're launching your podcast, just know you have to be comfortable with the way you sound. When I came on camera, I'm like, man, I don't like the way I sound. So I tried to change my voice. I tried to change my voice. I tried to change what I sounded like. I tried to change how I came on camera. But what I learned is that I can't change the way I sound. I can't change the way I look, but what I can do is use what I have. The phone was the thing that I had in addition to the short tripod, in addition to the 3 books, and it still wasn't tall enough, but I didn't make an excuse. I literally used what I had, and over time, I was able to develop, grow even more. What this did for me is that it helped me learn how to be confident on camera. You have to be confident. Become confident delivering yourself. Launching your podcast is understanding that if you're not coming on camera, if you're not educating, if you're not talking, if you're not providing value, then it's going to be hard. At first, it was hard for me, but then when I start to learn, like, wait, hold on, there's something here. Podcasting is more than just pressing record. Podcasting, when you launch your podcast, that's when the real work starts. That's when the real momentum gets built and the real dedication gets established. It's not the fact that you're not dedicated. It's more so when you launch your podcast, you are stepping into a new journey. You're stepping into a new path or journey. What does this mean? It means that you have to learn something new. When I started podcasting, I had to learn something new. And then over time, as I start to learn something new, it started helping people with their podcast. Something changed. What changed is that I start to see a difference. I start to see growth. I start to see confidence. I start to see, oh, now I'm learning about business. As I'm applying business, I start to see things differently. What became different became the blueprint of how to launch your podcast with confidence. You see, before you get confidence, before I got confidence, I had to be uncomfortable sharing myself. I had to be uncomfortable with the confidence that I did not have. Why? Because I will eventually become confident enough to launch my podcast. When you launch your podcast, when you use what you have to understand that you're not going to be good when you first start. No. You are going to get good over time, but you have to give yourself that time to develop, to grow, to improve, to evolve, to learn, to establish yourself. When you start to do this, you start to see growth. Launching your podcast comes from you making a commitment. When you are committed to the journey, when you're committed to providing value, making an impact, the podcast that you're launching is more than just a conversation. It turns into impact. It turns into a business. It turns into people listening to you. It turns into people coming in with you. It turns into a movement. If people, hold on. If people can't move with you, if they can't move with you, in other words, join your movement, they're going to move somewhere else. You see, they're going to move with another podcast. They're going to move with another person who's impacting them. They're going to move with someone else. But here's the thing. Before you start thinking about everything, think about one thing. And if you have a phone, iPad, camera, whatever the case is, you go use what you have. You start with what you have and then evolve over time. When I start to really understand, like, wait, hold on, there's a secret in investing into yourself. Before you start investing into yourself, you have to use what you have. When I start to use the camera, I start to learn how to work the camera, how to get in the camera, how to edit, how to publish, how to get people on, how to follow up, how to communicate. I started learning so many different things. And over time, the information, skills, and the knowledge that I was learning helped me understand it's more than just failure, it's knowledge. It's a movement, because now we're helping others turn setbacks into success. But before you get this success, before you get that accomplishment, you have to be okay with the failure. I was okay with failing publicly because I needed to do the work accordingly. So over time, as I start to grow, I'm like, oh, okay, there's something here. As I start to learn, there's something here. As I start to establish myself, there's something here. What's here is that when you first use what you have, you start to get organized. And as you're getting organized, you are developing a plan. You're developing a blueprint. It took me a long time to develop a plan. In other words, to learn the business behind podcasting. And as I start to learn more about it, I'm like, all right, okay, cool. How can I go about getting customers? How can I go about helping more people? How can I go about putting myself out there more? It's not just about having one way to podcast. It's about having multiple ways to make a connection with others. The podcast is just one step of it. So when you launch your podcast with confidence, you have to understand that you have everything that you need to launch your podcast. A lot of people online, they go out and spend so much money on studios, on equipment, on location. But the thing that they forgot to do was to use what they had. Because when you use what you have, you're not only using what you have, you are working with the tools, equipment, and skills that you have. And over time, you will develop. Over time, you will improve. Over time, you will literally get better. So one thing that I started to recognize, like, wait, hold on. Like, podcasting is more than just, like, it's something there. And what's there is opportunity. Opportunity. When you launch your podcast, this is a door. doors open. And they're open because you're approaching people differently. They're open because you're communicating with people. They're open because you're giving people a platform. They're open because you're not just asking for everything or anything. You're asking to learn about their journey. Before you start learning about other people's journey, you got to talk about your journey. So when I start to really like talk about everything I was doing, the growth, the documentation, like really bringing you all along the journey, I'm like, oh, okay, there's something here. When I started to launch my podcast and do it like consistently, things start to change. I start to really understand like the impact I was making, the movement that I was doing, and the business that I was in. Podcasting is like marketing yourself. When you put yourself out there, you have to market yourself in order for you to solve a problem. When you solve that problem, you're able to do it consistently. So then when I start to recognize, I'm like, all right, cool, launching your podcast or using your equipment is one step of the equation. The next step with launching your podcast with confidence is you have to have a format. When you have a format, you can podcast consistently. When you have a format, you can do more episodes in a structured way. When you have a format, you have structure. So you not only just having a structure, you operate your podcast as a business. So a format equals business. And it equals business because you are structured, you are organized, you are consistent, you are determined. A format helps you, a format helps you operate as a business. It helps you operate as a business. Why? Because you're organized. Whenever somebody come on to Phase Knowledge and we about to do an interview, a conversation, they get emails prior to the conversation. They get emails prior to us communicating. They get emails prior to us talking to each other. Why? Because it's information that's there. And then as this information is there, it's understanding the information that you're receiving only comes from operating as a business. Only come from what's going on, pairs. It only come from being organized. Only come from being structured. Only come from having a format. When I start to operate as a business, I start to podcast as a business, and it just came to me like it just really made sense. Like, wait, hold on. What if I just literally do everything like I'm doing my podcast? Like, it's now, okay, well, how do I get people to show up? Well, I have to have a certain way to communicate with people, which I've been doing. But I'm like, man, why is it so hard? Well, because I'm making it complicated. So when you operate as a business, you're always testing. You're always listening to your customers, and you always show up. See, when you have a format, not just winging the conversation no more. When you have a way to teach, educate, inform, bring value, talk about your business, sell a product or service, it's something that's there. What's there is your format, because that format doesn't change. What happens is that the guests change, but the format stays the same. Why? Because your format is the structure. The format is the business. The format is what makes you different. And when I start to become different, I'm like, oh, that's different. Okay, what's the business side of it? Then I start learning the business side of it. As I start to do the business, I'm like, oh, that's different. My wife and I went out to eat yesterday, and something hit me yesterday. I'm like, that makes sense. We went out to eat, but then when I thought about it, I was like, okay, hold on. Content should not be looked at as a hobby. Like, I shouldn't be doing it every now and then. I should be doing it every single day. What this means is this: I have to understand, not only do I have a format, I have a structure, I have a business to run, I have like a problem to solve. Eventually in the future, I will have employees to play. But before any of that happens, the format that's here today, the structure that's here today, the organization that's here today, the consistency that's here today, the customers that's here today, I have to be more organized. I'm becoming more organized the way I communicate with people. Why? Because if I want to operate as a podcast production business, I have to podcast, one, every single day, two, speak to customers every single day, three, solve a problem consistently. Because it's not just about creating the content, it's about solving the problem for other people who have the same problem. In business, as I started to recognize what business I was in, I'm like, okay, I need to do more work. I need to reach out to more people. I need to communicate with people. And that's when I start to what was it? Have a format. So when I start to have a format for everything, I'm like, okay, what is a format? A format can be templates. A format can be emails. A format can be text messages. A format can be hold on. Format can be communication. Format can be communication. A format can be a system. In other words, process. So, hold on. There we go. A format can be all these different things. Why? Because in business, you have to have structure. That was the thing that I was trying to figure out, like, what structure do I need it? Like, why am I not doing good at business? Why am I not making as much revenue as I know I need to? Because I was winging everything. And I wasn't documenting, having templates, having emails, putting emails in place, following up, reaching out to people. And so now that I understand what I'm doing, I'm really about to do more of it. Like, I'm not taking no more days off. Like, from this day on, I'm showing up every day talking about podcasting, how to launch your podcast, the challenges with podcasting, how to overcome that challenge, how to overcome that problem, how to be more consistent, how to generate revenue, how to make a business, how to do all these different things. Because in order for me to operate as a business, I have to be organized in a way where I can do it consistently. I don't need to be perfect. I need to be consistent. Oh, because now, as I'm consistent, launching my podcast is only just one step of it. It's like there's layers to it, right? You got layers to this. Step number one is to launch your podcast. Launch podcast. Step number two is to be consistent. And all the steps leads to this: solving one problem. What problem are you solving? The problem I'm solving is helping multifamily investors launch their podcast with confidence. And it took me a long time to get to that point. But now that I understand I'm at that place, it's like, well, how do you do it? Why are you doing it? When do you do it? How do you show it? How do you speak about it? What do you talk about? Because now when you go back to having your format can be the same for everybody that comes through. Your format can be the same for everybody that comes into your world, because the format has to be the same for others to experience something great. In other words, the way you do business, the way you do podcasting, the way you communicate with leads, you have to do it in a structured way. And I've been developing the structure for maybe 3 years. Now that I have it, it's like, oh, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Now I know what I'm doing, because I'm not just winging it no more. I'm literally being organized. So when you launch your podcast, just know that there's many layers to cut through. But when you cut through the first layer of getting confident on camera, you just got to do more of the confidence. You got to do more of the recording. You got to do more of the podcast. I'm saying that for myself as well. You have to do more, because more equals more impact. Your podcast is just one step of it. But when you do more, you help people, you encourage people, you inspire people, you show people what's possible. More impact is showing what's possible. It's possible because you are the one that's demonstrating why it's possible. So to go over what we just went over, first point number one is that you have to use what you have. If you're going to launch your podcast, do not go out and get fancy equipment, fancy studio, fancy anything. Go out and use what you have. If you have an Android or iPhone, don't matter the phone. As long as you have a camera, go start recording yourself. Point number two is that you have to have a format. In other words, you have to wait to do your podcast, to create content, to make the impact, to make the movement. Then you have to have something to sell, operate as a business, be more organized. The last point I'm going to talk about is this. Last point is that you have to practice. Practice, not just podcasting, not just having conversations, but practice solving a problem. Practice solving a problem. Because when you practice to solve a problem, you're practicing to develop a system. You're practicing to develop a know-how. All right, so when I do this, I need to do that. When I say this, sometimes it come off wrong, it's come out confusing. Let me change this. And so what I've been doing lately is literally practicing how I communicate. It's literally practicing how I educate. It's literally practicing how I create content. It's literally practicing how I follow up with people. It's literally practicing. I can't be good if I'm not practicing. I can't perform if I'm not practicing. I can't be a business owner if I don't practice every single day. I have to practice when no one is watching. Because when people start to watch, the years of practice, the years of development, the years of growth, the years of figuring it out, it's like, oh, okay, y'all seen it today, but if y'all would have saw it a half a decade ago, I literally remember when I first picked up the microphone, I had the microphone in my hand, right there, that's the microphone, and it had a little cord, let's say microphone. And the cord wasn't even long enough, so I'm trying to talk on the mic. And I stutter on the mic, and I could get afraid of the mic. It's not the fact that I was afraid of the mic. It was the fact that I was afraid to fail in public. So when I start to do it more often, I'm like, ooh, okay, there's something here. There's something here that a lot of people is missing, is that you have to practice when you mess up. You can't be good if you're not willing to mess up. That's why failure is so important, because you have to be okay with failure. You're not going to know everything, yet you can learn what you need to do in order for you to discover everything. Hold on. Because now, when you start to practice podcasting, when you start to practice having sales calls, when you start to practice following up, everything starts to operate as a business, as a system, as a process. Because now you do it in a structured way. Because when you have structure, you're more organized. When you're more organized, you're seen differently. Like there's a terminology called perceived value. And what this value consists of is this. What are you teaching people? Oh, that don't look like perceived value. Hold on. Perceived. There we go. Perceived value. How are you helping others? How are you encouraging others? What problem are you solving? How are you solving it? What is the proof? Where's the social? Where is all these different things? When you have perceived value, you have a way of doing business. Because you're not winging it, you have already figured it out when nobody was there. And as you have figured it out, you just do more of what's already working. You do more of what's working and why it's working. So I was like, oh, okay, what if I continue to help people launch their podcast with confidence? Okay, well, first you have to use what you have. And then when you use what you have to have a format. And when you have a format, you have to do it consistently. You have to do it like every single day so you can practice. But then where does the business come from? This is a whole nother conversation. Because now you got to learn what to sell, what problem to solve, who to solve it with, and how to reach that person. So it's not easy, but it's not meant to be easy. It's meant to challenge you. It's meant to push you. It's meant for you to figure it out. Over the last half a decade, I've been challenged. I've been pushed. I've been encouraged. I've been doubting myself. I've been confused. I've been pivoting. I've been doing business. Because in business, you have to be okay with change. In business, you have to be okay with things not working the first time. But what about the second time? You have to be okay with the journey, because the journey is going to teach you a lesson. That journey is going to teach you what failure actually means. Because as you're trying, you're growing. As you're growing, you're learning. As you're learning, you start to see what's new. Why is it working? Why is it not working? What could be better? So when I start to really understand and get feedback from everything that I'm doing, I'm like, okay, I need to change this. I need to adjust this. I need to work on this. I need to do that. It's been so many different things I need to work on. And in fact, as I'm talking about this, one thing that I have to talk about is that you got to keep it simple. I'm like, man, like, why is it so hard? Because I've been trying to like overcomplicate things when I can just keep it simple. And recently I'm like, okay, let me just keep it simple. And I've been keeping it simple, and I saw a major change. The change that I saw was that I was focused. The change that I saw was that I was literally doing the work. Change that I saw is that I was podcasting as a business. So I don't need to sell everything, but what I do need to do is sell the thing to a particular customer and sell it often. And that's what I'm gonna be doing the last couple next following days, is that I'm literally gonna be documenting as I'm continue to document not only how to launch your podcast, but how to establish a business behind your podcast. That's what I'm documenting. And that's why that's important, because failure is knowledge. You can't succeed if you don't fail. You can't succeed if you don't learn. You can't succeed if you don't grow. You can't succeed if you don't understand what you're doing. You can't succeed if you're not putting yourself out there. But to put yourself out there, you have to understand that you have to go through a journey. You have to go through a process. You have to go through a path. But then when you figure it out, you start doing more of what's working. So just to recap everything that we talked about in this phenomenal episode, how to launch your podcast with confidence. Point number one is that you have to use what you have. You might not have everything, but if you have a phone with the camera, you have everything that you need to launch your podcast. Point number two, you have to have a format. In other words, operate your podcast as a business, as a system, as a daily routine. When you do this, you start to see change. You start to see results. You start to see impact. And last thing that we talk about is this, is that you have to practice solving a problem. And I say practice solving a problem because now you have to operate as a business, because when you practice solving this problem, you're practicing doing business. And as you practice to do business, you start to understand why you're solving a particular problem. So this has been a phenomenal episode. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur and or a business owner that's growing and want to join a fantastic community, make sure you hit that follow and subscribe. In addition to that, leave in the comments below if you would like a link to join the newsletter, so you can always stay up to date on the episodes, the conversations we have, and what to expect. Lastly, don't be afraid to fail, because failure is knowledge.